Hi, everyone. Let me know if you're here. We're getting a little bit of a late start. Sorry about that. But welcome back to Orthodox Family Life. We're having another live stream specifically on homeschooling. So please let me know if you have any questions. You can leave them in the chat. I cannot see the comment section from where I am right now, so below the video. So if you have a question, please go ahead and put it in the chat. Okay, so I wanted to start by giving a little shout out to a friend of mine, Abigail, who has a really delightful YouTube channel called Abigail Narrates. And I will link it down below once the video is over. But she is a young girl in Utah, and she does just some really beautiful chanting and singing of the hymns of the church. So I highly recommend Abigail's channel. I want to say thank you to the 3 new members we got this week, our first 3 new members. We have Babs and Inez over on YouTube, and then we have on our Patreon my old friend Sarah. So thank you for all the support. I hope that over this summer we'll see some updates about memberships, but for now, just thank you to all the new members. And lastly, I don't usually say this, but please do share these videos. Hey, Nico, can you close the door? Thanks. Please do share these videos with other homeschoolers you may know that you think might find these videos helpful. I was watching a different YouTube video on homeschooling. One of the big channels did it, and they got about 1,000 views in a very short amount of time. So I have to say I was a little bit envious of that. You know, I wish we could get that many people over here having real in-depth discussions on homeschooling and how to do it and what some of the real issues are and how to solve those problems. So please do share. So today I wanted to go over a few questions that I've gotten since the last video. But first, I want to start with a little bit of a recent history of homeschooling in the U.S. And this is going to tie into some of the things we'll be talking about. Homeschooling is pretty new. It is legal in all 50 states in the U.S. I don't have any experience in Canada or other states or other countries, so I can't speak to that. But in the U.S., it is legal everywhere. Because education is regulated on the state level, each state has its own laws governing homeschooling. So I'm going to speak specifically about California, and I'd be really interested to hear if other states are seeing similar changes. So in California, we had really the pioneers of homeschooling in this state about in the 1980s. And these were, for the most part, many faithful Protestant Christians who didn't want their kids in the public school system. And so they went through a lot of the legal battles to get the law set up in California where it would be legal here with no ambiguity about that. So these were some of our really diehards in homeschooling. They were really pioneering. They felt very strongly about it, and they were very for the most part, very anti-government school, and they would call it government school, not public school. And so we had that dynamic going on. In the late 90s and early 2000s, we really saw the rise of the charter school in California. And so a charter school is a public school, and it is governed by a different set of rules than regular public schools. And so they have to kind of get special permission to operate under those rules. And charter schools can be run as a normal public school. So in California, what we do, we have 2 options for homeschooling, 3 really legally. You can be a certified teacher or have a certified teacher oversee the education of your child. You can you can set yourself up as a private school, which is what I've done. And the third option is to be in one of these charter schools. I feel like I'm forgetting an option, but for now, the main thing I want to focus on is being your own private school in California and being in a charter school. And I've done both of these at different times. So, but specifically, I want to talk about how the charter schools changed homeschooling in California. So what that really did was it brought a change in the way people were envisioning what homeschooling looks like. So in the 80s, with these pioneers, you had people who were teaching everything at home, or they were coming together as small co-ops and covering everything, high school, sciences, everything. And they were very passionate, and really, they really believed that they could offer as an individual family or as a small group, everything that their child needed. And they were also rethinking what education means. And so some of them would stick to the school at home model, but others would get into classical or having a little more freedom, project based, things like this. I'm going to say hi to everyone in the chats: Christina, Sophia, Marilyn, Post. Good to see everybody. Um, please do leave questions there, and I'll come back to it every once in a while. So when the charter schools came, you were able to get about, I think, $1,800 when we started back in maybe 2004 or 5 per child per year. So you can imagine, if you're a family on one income in California, that having that money to buy educational supplies with was very, very enticing, you know. And if you're a new homeschooler, as I was at the time, it also gave you a certain amount of confidence that you weren't going to screw everything up, because you would have a teacher who oversaw your curriculum choices, your progress. You would meet with them every 20 school days. And then you would have this little bit of money, which multiplied by a couple of kids comes out to thousands of dollars. So you'd have that money to buy curriculum, right? But there's always a catch. So there is no such a thing as free money. So what you end up doing is you give over a little bit of your own freedom, and you also have to do an increasingly amount of lots of recording for the school, because the school goes through an accreditation process like any public school and many private schools. And the accreditation process repeats every few years. And so to be accredited, they have to reach certain criteria. So the accreditation people will come in, they'll look at your school, and they'll say, okay, here's the things that I want you to change before we come back. And they come back in a few years, and you go through that process. So the process is always more recording, more detailed reports, right? And so the way this played out in the charter schools in California was that a charter school would open, it would be very free, both with its money and allowing you to do whatever you wanted to do. And slowly, over the next few years, you would see changes coming out. Now you have to record this. Now you have to record that. You have to give more detailed recording. We're not letting you choose what you want to do. You have these maybe 5 or 6 programs you have to follow, and you have to pick one of these, right? And of course, you were never able to buy any kind of Christian curriculum, but in the beginning, you could still use it, and then eventually they wouldn't even let you use it. You'd have to, for instance, if someone was using a Becca or Bob Jones, which are kind of boxed curriculums from different Protestant groups, if you did their math page, you would actually have to cut off the bottom where it said Pensacola Christian College, because it would trigger something in the auditing system for the charter school. Hey, Mella. Hey, Stevie. Good to see you both. So over time, people were slowly required to report more and more. They became more testing. And you could be doing something with your children. Maybe your children are doing apologia science, so they're studying a whole year of astronomy. So they're doing a deep dive over the year in astronomy. They would still be tested on, butterflies and the standard science standards for whatever their grade level was. And it didn't matter if your child was behind or not, but still making progress. They would always be pushing for that child to meet the current standard. So maybe your child was just chronically a year behind. Your teacher is going to give you a hard time with that every time you meet with them. So as you can see, this creates a lot of stress on the parents, and it kind of starts to make you doubt yourself if your child is behind, right? And it's just, there's so much reporting. And sometimes we would make samples for our teacher that had nothing to do with what we were actually learning, because they required a sample on a certain subject that we weren't teaching that year. There were also really crazy things like, of course, the public school gets money if you are there. And so it's all based on attendance. One of the main things is attendance. And so the very last charter we were in, which was really horrible, experience for us. They had us sign all of the attendance records for the entire year. So technically, my students were in class every day, and these got to the point where they wanted them signed, on this special device, and it had to. It was just there was always more hoops, and the money lessened over time. So all those hoops for the school obviously requires money. So as the time went on, less and less money came to the parents and the students to actually buy curriculum or to take classes, and more and more went to just the administration of the school, as you can imagine. So it's a really odd situation. But one of the lasting effects of that, I think, was um, people becoming dependent on that money from the government, um, and also not forming little communities of homeschoolers like the people in the 80s did. So in the 80s, when people were doing this, 80s and 90s, you would have, a very robust homeschool group, women of all ages, lots and lots of children, people who had been through homeschooling before and could help the younger moms. And I think when the charters came, it really disrupted that. Again, if someone else is in a different state, you can let me know if your situation was different than what has been going on in California. So now I want to fast forward to now the 2020s and how homeschooling has changed and some of my thoughts on that. I think I mentioned that there was another large channel or much larger channel than mine that had an episode, a live stream on homeschooling recently. And and I want to comment on one of the comments that was made on that channel, on that video. And I think it was someone from who obviously wasn't a homeschooler because they were very anti-homeschooling. And we're gonna kind of circle back to homeschooling now. Yeah, Mela, the hoops for charters, one thing I forgot to mention, will just grow and grow. And once you hit high school, the hoops for the charter school are insane, and it's a lot of pressure. So I understand people wanting to be in it when the kids are young, but I would do whatever you could to kind of break free from that. Oh, hey, Michaela, nice to see you. I hope I do run into you today. So on this video, a comment was made that homeschooling is a band-aid, a fix. To fix the real problem of what's going on in the public school system, responsible parents need to take over the school boards. Now, I heard these kind of comments for the last 25 years. Um, and here's what I'm going to say to that. And it's going to sound maybe a little bit harsh, but it's not my job to fix the public school system. It's not my kids' jobs to stay in the public school system to fix it. Um, if I would have taken that approach, I think I would have lost my kids, honestly. Um, I pulled my kids out or never entered them into the system because I didn't want them damaged by the damaged system of the public school system. I realize that there are people that have to send their kids to public school. Um, and a friend recently asked me to promote that, and quite frankly, I can't promote that. But if you're in a public school, then I would suggest that you find people who have put their kids in public school and have done it successfully and ask them how to navigate that. I don't have any experience in that, so I can't help with that. But I do know that I don't think it's fair to say to homeschoolers, you should sacrifice your own kids in the hope that something will miraculously change. But, if you've been watching these things unfold for the last 2 or 3 decades, it's like, do you really think public school system is better now than it was 20 years ago? Do you really think it's going to be better in the next 20 years? I don't think so. So I'm not willing to sacrifice my kids on that altar, and we each have to make that decision as parents. Another thing that was said was most children cannot learn what they need to learn at home. And all of us were homeschooled. All of us were homeschool teachers in 2021. Kids can absolutely learn everything they need to at home. I'm not going to address that. But this part about all of us were homeschool teachers in 2021 is kind of the crux of why I'm giving you the history of recent homeschooling. Because forgive me, but I don't think if you were a parent and your kids were in public school during COVID and you got to see what the kids were doing in school, that's not homeschooling. You definitely got maybe some kind of a taste of it, but homeschooling is a completely different thing And, that was one of the benefits of COVID, obviously, that parents got to see what was really going on in the public school system. But um, homeschooling is something that is led by the parents, and it's not a child sitting, at a computer all day long. I mean, in rare cases, it is, but that has not been the experience of homeschoolers for the last 40 years. And then lastly, if you pitch the perfect game, even if you pitch the perfect game as a homeschooler, the world still awaits your children anyway. So what does it matter to invest all this time in the proper formation of your children if you're just going to send them out into the world? Well, I would argue that if you let the world form your children, you're going to get one. Um, your children are going to conform to the world when they leave your home, right? But if you take the time and teach your children well, and both educationally and spiritually, and form them to what the church says is a real human being, yeah, they might struggle in the world in some sense, but I think all Christians who are struggling to live a Christian life have to struggle against what's in the world. So I don't really understand those kinds of comments, and I don't really understand why people would go to a video that they disagree with and, um, you know, make comments like this. They say you send your children to Caesar, and they will come out Romans. Thank you, Stevie. That's exactly it. And God bless you if that's the only choice you have. I'm not trying to put parents down if that is the choice you've made so far, or you truly don't have any other options. And I really mean that. I do know kids that have gone through the public school system and have been okay, but I know far more that have come out really damaged by it. So if you have to put your kids in, then I think you should go find some mentors that have done it well, and be praying just all the time about that. So the last thing I want to say about the history is that we had this little homeschool bookstore in the town I used to live in. And so there was about maybe 10 or 12 bookshelves, floor to ceiling, of all these different curriculums used. So you could sell your used curriculum. You could buy used curriculum for the next year. They had some new stuff. They had a ton of really healthy novels for kids to read. And then they also had a few classrooms where you could pay to have individual classes. So you could have a Spanish class or a biology class or something like this. And it was a fantastic resource for our little homeschool community. I went back recently, about 2 years ago, and I still know the man that runs it. And I was shocked because all of the books were gone. I think they had 2 bookshelves left. It had only been about 5 or 6 years. And so I was talking to him. I said, "So this looks very different. What's going on here?" And he said, "Nobody is buying the homeschool curriculum anymore. The new season of, the new parents right now just want to put their kids in a class." And so he said, "We make more money selling candy now than we do homeschool books or novels." Now, I'm not trying to get on all the new parents out there that are trying to homeschool and trying to do the best thing. That's not my intention. But what I hope through the series of videos that I'm showing you. Oh, thank you so much, Stevie. Thank you so much. That's our very second, what are they called? Super chats? Thank you, Stevie. Thank you very much. I'm not trying to discourage people, but what I hope to do with my videos, my deep dives into the different foundational skills that we just did, I'm hoping to post another one in the next few days, and then move on to the middle school years and what those look like, and talk about puberty and just everything that goes on with each age level. What I'm trying to do is give you a model to a vision for what your homeschool can look like. Now, if you have 2 parents that are working full time, and you have to do that, and you have to just put your kids in classes, and there's really wonderful places like Classical Learning Resource Center. God bless you. I'm not saying you have to do it perfectly or don't bother doing it. However, for most of us, we can really make homeschooling this really wonderful thing. You can collect into small groups, have co-ops. You can really offer high school science. Just locally here, we've been able to offer high school science from an actual engineer. We have, writing from someone who was a university professor in writing. You have these resources in your community, and you just need to learn to reach out and ask people to help and to gather, and you can do this together, instead of always farming it out. I hope that makes sense, but that's really my goal with all the videos I'm gonna be doing in the next 2 months on homeschooling is show you the vision of what the people in the '80s were doing and how their children, benefited from learning from people in their real life and binding together in these small homeschool communities. It's also a lot cheaper to do that, quite frankly, because when you're always farming things out, you're having to repay for the same thing. If you invest in a high school biology textbook and materials, you're paying for that once. If you have to send 4, 5, 6 kids to a biology class, you're talking about $1,000 over time. So it is actually economical as well. Okay, so enough about that. Any questions about kind of that history, or are you guys new homeschoolers? Are you doing it where you're just paying for classes? Are you having a hard time finding curriculum? I'm going to go on with the next questions, but if you have anything to say about the history, let me know. So I got a question from a delightful lady in Australia, and she wanted to know, when in the world do you prepare for homeschooling when the day is so busy? Um, and that's a little bit of a hard one because being a homeschooler is a really tough job. It's a serious job. I always took it very seriously. We get up, we get dressed, we put our shoes on, we get all of our stuff done, our morning stuff before we start the academic day. So to prepare, you might have to stay up late if that's your thing and prepare, or get up early the next day. And when they're young, you can find those little minutes. So sometimes if I'm working with a child on phonics and they're working with a little worksheet or something that they're doing, I can take that few little minutes and quickly plan out what I'm going to do the next day because I'm with them in that moment. I can see where they're at and I can see where we need to go for the next step. Yeah, Marilyn says my daughter starts this year and I'm just overwhelmed with so many things out there. Yeah, that was something else I'll come back to in a moment, Marilyn. But homeschooling is work, and if you're going to take this seriously and do this as a true full-time job, you also have the full-time job of being a mom and, shopping and cooking and cleaning. There's a lot. And I heard from an older homeschool mom that you can really only expect 2 out of 3 things in a given day. So the 3 things are a clean house, good, simple, healthy food, and educated kids. Okay, so any given day, you probably are only gonna get 2 of those done. That might mean that you have an awesome educational day. The house ends and it's pretty tidy, but you ate corn dogs for dinner, okay? Sorry, Sophia, if she's here, she'll be horrified. But, you know, in the grand scheme of things, those are options you're gonna have to think about, right? What's really important to you in that day? Maybe you have a home cooked meal that's everything is from scratch and the kids got to help. And maybe you had a great educational day and you went on a field trip, or, it was just a very successful, positive day. But at the end of the day, maybe your house is a wreck. You're just gonna have to deal with some of this. You're not what they show you on Pinterest and on Instagram is not real. Your house is not gonna be perfectly clean. Your children are not gonna be perfectly behaved all the time. You truly can't do everything all the time. So, as my mom once told me, you need to hang up your cape. You're not Superwoman. You can't do it all. And that's okay. We're not striving for perfection. We're just striving for good, healthy days every day. Okay, so Poe says, I can imagine it's important to include a physical component, some kind of activity or exercise. Absolutely, especially for the young kids, but for the older kids too. So what we would typically do is we'd get up, everyone had their kind of their chore list they'd have to do before breakfast. So if your chores weren't done, then, breakfast wasn't ready for you yet. And we typically all ate together for breakfast. And then we would have kind of our prayer time and reading. And then everyone would start usually with math. We always started with math. And so we would use that after math time slot for kids to go take their first kind of recess break, right? Because we got up pretty early. It was either cold or dark in the morning. But you absolutely, especially for the little kids, they need a lot of outside time. And it might be your day is just kind of a back and forth between being in for a little while and then letting them run around outside. Yeah, Mel says IG content annoys me. It does me too, because it will set a standard for you that you will never meet. If you watch Instagram and all the moms there, you're never going to be that because those ladies aren't that. It's not true. Um, yeah, more and more churches are starting co-ops, and if you're in a small parish, if I can recommend that maybe you have a co-op between all of the parishes in your area. It doesn't have to only be for your parish. Honestly, an Orthodox co-op would be wonderful. Honestly, we didn't get that until my last was in high school, so we always were in Christian co-ops, and we had a very good experience. They were very delightful ladies, and we were able to find people that had similar educational goals than us. My children were always on the outside. They were the only Orthodox in this mostly Protestant homeschool group, and the only homeschoolers for a long time in our Orthodox church. But that's okay. They learn to be different, which is, I think, a great skill for kids to learn. And having the Protestants as close friends, we were able to kind of experience what they believe and how they think about things, and led to a lot of really good discussion. So I'm not fearful of things like that as long as you understand your faith and you make things really clear for your kids. We had a little girl tell my daughter that only Protestants go to heaven. And I was like, well, no, we don't do that. And so we had several long talks about that. It's what fourth graders talk about on the playground, apparently. Or we had weird things like the high schoolers would do something called fast food frenzy, where they would get together and go to as many fast foods as possible in a short amount of time. Of course, it was always on a Friday, so there was that. But it got to the point where the kids were eating so much that they would actually vomit. And so we just said, we're not doing this anymore. This has turned into something insane. This is not how we properly relate to food. Like, it was strange to me that the parents didn't have a problem with that. But I think in Orthodoxy, we just kind of intuitively know, like, that's weird. We're not going to eat until we vomit. Okay. That's just strange. Okay. Sorry to share that. It's kind of gross. But anyway, you're always going to have to deal with strange things your kids hear. Yeah, it is wild, Marilyn. Okay, so I got another comment or question about TV. I talked about TV and watching TV in my last, I think it was the foundational video. And guys, I'm really bad at naming videos, so they don't sound very interesting, but I think it was a good video if you have young kids. It was talking about the basic skills that your children need in the early years and how important it is to develop those skills, and that later skills are a synthesis of the lower level skills. Um, so, not exciting titles. I'll try to work on that, but I think it was a good video. Okay, so about TV. uh, Let me just clarify some thoughts on that. I really don't think young children should be watching TV. Um, Definitely not under 3. I think we didn't have a TV until um, maybe like our oldest was 6 or 7. So several of our kids had 0 TV in their toddler years, which I think is definitely best. Um, I don't think you need me to tell you that screens are bad for young children. There's been so much research on this. You don't even have to talk about this from a spiritual point of view, although it certainly applies. But screens will rewire or miswire your kid's brain. It will addict them to things. And I'm not talking about, inappropriate things. I'm just saying the bright lights, the colors, the constant engagement. It's been a giant experiment on our children, and we really don't know how they're going to. Yeah, well, I guess we're seeing now what happens to people when they were allowed to have screens when they're very young. I choose to have my kids be the control group, and as people that didn't have screens as young kids. But as I've said before, by the time they're teenagers, maybe you want your children to, be able to navigate that world, right? And so that's for the high school years. I think teach them how to navigate the types of things that we would allow ourselves to watch and what we wouldn't. Where are those boundaries, right? So forgive me if this upsets anyone, but I had, a young man, an Orthodox young man, very faithful, tell me that he watches Game of Thrones. From my understanding, that is like a very sexual TV show. So I don't just think that's inappropriate for teenagers to watch. I think that would be inappropriate for anyone to watch. Um, just because we turn 18 doesn't, make sinful things okay to watch on TV. We might have more context for it, but I think we have to be um, really, really careful about what we allow. So, and that's really in those middle school years is where you're going to slowly, let them watch things. It's hard for me to talk about the TV use in general because every family is different, and there's some young kids that are extremely sensitive to scary things. And so, I think we were talking about the movie Nemo privately, and they said that their child got really terrified by Bruce. And well, it turns out the child is a 3-year-old. So to a 3-year-old, Bruce is terrifying. And the opening scene when the mom gets eaten by the big fish is also terrifying. Now, a 10-year-old is probably going to have a totally different reaction to that than a 3-year-old. So you just need to think about that. Like, is your child ready for these things? How sensitive are they? What is a blippy, guys? I don't know what this is. Yeah, and as Moldy said, the kids' content now is like a bad acid trip. Not that I would know. Yeah, and it's just unnatural. And I remember hearing a long time ago that again, some of these things we don't really need research, we just need common sense for. But if they were to have a TV program that would be appropriate for children, it would actually be like Mr. Rogers, where he talks slowly, everything, but the puppets, they're kind of creepy. Um, everything's very slow. He's very gentle. He's talking to them in a normal voice. There's no baby talk. There's no flashing lights or strange colors. Right? That's actually what is good for them developmentally, if anything, on TV. And you can, just think about how far we are from anything like that. I think the other program show that came out at the same time was Sesame Street, and so they were talking about how Sesame Street was, developmentally really bad for children. It doesn't matter if they like it or not. Being bad for them is different than whether or not they like it. Okay, and I typically want to save things like Planet Earth, and there are some educational videos that I don't have a problem with, but you want to, not use educational videos as an excuse to just let your kids watch TV all the time. So for me, things like Planet Earth or other documentaries, we would say that for when they're sick or if they've been studying, the polar regions. Okay, now you can watch the video on that. That makes sense to me. But just to let them watch things, certainly without you and just all the time, is going to train your kids to want that more and more, which I think we talked about. Okay, another question I got was the Orthodox point of view on teaching history and science. And I'm going to throw literature in this for a moment. And I'm going to say this isn't the Orthodox point of view. This is just one Orthodox lady's point of view on this. We don't have a lot of Orthodox curriculum available. And the very few things that are available, even that can be contentious among people. Some people say it's too lax, it's too rigid. And again, most of these things are even for the very youngest grades. So we don't have an Orthodox history program yet. I've heard Orthodox Ethos is working on that. But so for now, and for the last 25 years, we've all had to just do our best. And so I think what's important is that you understand the faith as best you can. And if you need to seek guidance from that, from a husband, your priest, whoever, I would do that. But you can only do your best. But let's talk about history first. I think the problem you're going to see with most history programs is if you choose a Protestant program, it's going to be very anti-Orthodox. So I typically would not choose any kind of Protestant um, history program. Um, Now, I don't know about any Catholic programs. They would probably be a little better, but I think they would still have some underlining issues. Now, if you're, a former Catholic and you recognize those and you can talk your way through it and help your kid, maybe that would work. I don't know. Um, we found secular things to be a little easier to navigate just because some of the Protestant programs, their theology is just so embedded in the program, you really can't tear it apart. So we use Story of the World for history and then some different things as they got older. The lady that wrote Story of the World, Susan Weisbauer, she does claim to still be a Christian, but, you know, I think she would lean maybe a little more liberally. So, and then some things she just gets wrong, like calling St. Nicholas a Turk, those kinds of things, which I've told you guys before. Um, yeah, Vanimedes, that is exactly kind of my current thinking on this is that history classes need a large, as far as we know, disclaimer. As things have kind of been revealed in the last few years, the teaching of history to your children, especially high schoolers, I wouldn't talk anything else below that, has become really challenging. And I really wish some of these guys who are very knowledgeable, Jay Dyer and others out there who really know their Orthodox history, um, would come up with a high school history program. Someone should do this. It's really needed in the church, and we don't have it right now. Parents are just having to do this alone. But again, I just want to say that you're still going to do a better job than most public school history programs. Um, I've been told Nourishing Souls has some good content to supplement the faith, and it's free. Marilyn, can you tell us more about that? Because I'm not at all familiar with them. Yeah, Father John Strickland does seem solid, and that is what my high schooler is reading right now. Not the problem with Father John's program, but his series of books, which is very good, kind of assumes that you already know things. So it's more of a cultural history. It's not um, these are the events that happened. So they would already have to have a pretty good understanding of the events because they're just referenced, and Father is talking about, um, how it kind of all ties in together culturally. Now, Father John is a friend of mine, and he's on my short list of people to have on. So maybe having him talk about how to teach history would be a good thing, but I'll keep you posted on that. The other thing with teaching history that I think you should look out for is that even among the classical educational materials that tend to be pretty good, even the Christian classical education stuff, it's still coming out of the Enlightenment. So it's still pro-Enlightenment. So if you don't understand that and why that's a problem, again, that's probably something you should talk to your priest about or some other knowledgeable Orthodox Christian who can explain why for us we don't really look at it as a period of enlightenment, but of great spiritual darkness. So again, that's going to color everything else. So it's really difficult, but just struggling through those issues and being honest with your, I'm talking high school here about the issues and saying I don't know is okay. I think it's still going to be a better conversation and a better foundation in history than what you're going to get in the public school system. I know for our public school system, we only had to do one full year of world history and 1 year of American. In our homeschool, we do history every single year on a 4-year cycle, ancient, medieval, Renaissance, modern. And so we're going much deeper into the material than we just cycle through over and over. Okay, so any questions about history, you can let me know, but that's kind of my take on that. Honestly, the other issue is that they'll often misrepresent historical figures that are Orthodox, like St. John Chrysostom, St. Paul, Constantine and Helen, or just not mention them at all. Nothing at all happened in the Eastern Roman Empire between 400 and 1452. Okay, so let's move on to science then. So my thoughts on science, again, we're talking about a high school level science. and maybe a little bit in the younger years, but mostly high school. The two main things I think you're going to run into with science would be um, maybe three: creation versus evolution. I went down this rabbit hole when my oldest was in ninth grade. Um, and I started out believing that, of course, of course, God created the world. That I know, but growing up in America, you learn that evolution is true. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, well, there must be some way that these two things can coexist. And through my own research into what the church teaches about this and researching kind of what evolution really means and kind of the details of that and how that's all fleshed out, I came to believe that these two things cannot actually coexist. That's my personal opinion. Um, what does the church teach? There are saints that have, um, writings on this, Saint Basil the Great, and of course, there's the big book now. Is it Creation, Early Man, and Genesis, something like that? Might be mixing up the title. That you can read and find out more. So I do believe that the more traditional Orthodox view leans heavily towards creationism. I don't know that that's a hill I would die on with a high schooler if they're coming out of the public school system and they've kind of already um, been taught about evolution. I would. So let me back up a little bit. That's a little different than you're at home and you're laying out the Orthodox vision for this. I would do that. What I think is the Orthodox vision, which is creationism. I'm actually a young Earth creationist at this point. But if your child has already been in school or they already have been kind of if they've already bought into that science is always correct, right? Then you're going to have to maybe more gently unfold this for them. And I would end in just saying I had a discussion with high schoolers at a church camp where I did a talk on this exact topic. And they were all, for the most part, public school kids. So I left them with just saying, in the creed, we say that, God created the heavens and the earth. And that if you're sitting in your high school biology class and your teacher is very atheistic and they're pushing evolution and saying that you're stupid if you believe God created the world, please know that you're not stupid if you believe that. This issue is very deep and you can go very deep into both sides and trying to understand that. So that was the only thing I was really trying to convey to those kids, and that ultimately the church says that God created all things. That's kind of where I left it with that group. Again, if you're at home and you're doing your own work, my personal opinion is that, yeah, the church teaches that evolution isn't true, that the Lord made everything. Okay, Marilyn says, from what I've heard, it's a group of people that came together to find resources that are more orthodox to supplement in the Ambleside online curriculum. Nourishing Souls is the name of the website. That sounds wonderful. I've heard really great things about Ambleside, which is an online free curriculum. It was a dad, I believe his wife passed away, and so he wanted to continue homeschooling, and he built this entire free database of materials for how to classically homeschool your own children. So Nourishing Souls, I'll definitely look into that. Thanks, Marilyn. Yes, thank you, Moldy. And hi, Matushka. Great to see you, or to see you in the chat. Okay, so the other two big things about science, I'd say, is the issues around biology and the truth of biology. So, not a problem in the sense of we know what the truth is, obviously, but finding books that maybe handle that the way you want it to be handled. So, um, but that's something I would have a lot of caution around with your kids. Teach them the truth, but be cautious about what materials you allow into your home. That's what I'm saying there. And finally, the other big thing in science is, of course, a lot of the books have some embedded atheism. So if you go into, if you're choosing a secular science, I should say these are the things that you need to worry about. I always chose Apologia, which is a Christian-based science. But if you're choosing a secular curriculum, then you're going to have to look out for the evolutionary stuff, the questionable biology stuff, and then just the general atheistic worldview. Germ theory versus environment theory is interesting. I've only heard a little bit about this, Vanimedes. I haven't taught high school biology for many, many years, so, but yeah, I think high schoolers are able to kinda handle these bigger ideas. I think it's important for them to start handling these bigger ideas and, um, let them hear both sides. That's what science is supposed to be about, right? Okay, and lastly, I wanna talk about literature. I have, someone lined up to come on the channel and talk about literature, hopefully later this summer. Um, this is a really big conversation, um, in the Orthodox classical world around the point of view of literature, the Orthodox point of view of literature. Some people are saying you shouldn't allow your kids to have any literature until they're formed in the church. Some people are saying everything is okay. A few people are saying everything's okay. Most people are saying, you want to cut out maybe the worst stuff, but that it's usually magic is the thing that trips people up. Do you allow books with magic? What kind of magic? To what degree? Because we do have to be honest that Harry Potter is different than Narnia, and that's different than uh, Tolkien, right? These handle magic in different ways, and the question is usually around: is it right to give a child who's Orthodox these ideas that are unorthodox, right? This takes a lot of um, discernment on the parents' part, and I definitely, yeah, Vanimedes. So Vanimedes is saying maybe with a preface that magic is generally demonic. Yes, of course, magic is, as we know, it is demonic. I think what trips people up is that when you look at like the fairy tales, let's say, coming out of Western Europe, and if you look at things like Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, it is an unknowable magic. So neither of those things focuses on the casting of spells. Maybe spells are cast in those stories, but it's different than in Harry Potter, where you actually have the doing of the magic is the point of the book, is a large portion of the book. And so in those old stories and in Tolkien, magic is kind of taking the place of God's providence. And so it's sometimes described as magic, like in the fairy tales in particular, but it's really talking about the providence of God. So, these are very, I hate to say it, nuanced conversations, but that's why I think maybe it's not appropriate for younger kids. And a family needs to think about, you know, um, where they're at. It's different if you're raising your kids from the beginning at home in a homeschool situation and you've been Orthodox the whole time. That's a very different situation than you just became Orthodox. You're pulling your kids out of public school and they've already read some of this stuff. Um, you know, I have whole talks on this already, so I don't want to get too off into these weeds because it's a very complicated situation. But I think the Greek myths also fit in this category. The Greek gods and goddesses are demons. And these are actual demons that were in actual temples and actual towns and actually did really terrible things. So why are we embracing things like Percy Jackson? Right? That's a real problem for me. I think that to me is a bigger problem than something like Tolkien. So um, this is why the discernment has to be with the parents, and they have to seek, spiritual guidance on these things. It's just not everyone is in the same place. And I also want to say that I don't think any of that is necessary. I don't think Tolkien is necessary for a child. I don't think Harry Potter or 50 Shades of Grey is good for anybody. I don't care how old you are. So I think there's some definite lines that we can make, but there is some gray area. And I was sitting at a table a couple years ago with a matushka, the daughter of a priest, and two ladies that each have daughters in the monastery, and myself. And we had this exact conversation. And all of us did not agree on where the line was. So, um, among good, faithful Orthodox people, you can draw the line in different places. I think we all agree that certain things are off topic or out of bounds, and that some people, and that we can agree on the things that all kids should read, the lives of the saints. Um, but people are in different places, and we just have to allow that. We're not We're not here to mandate what people should and shouldn't read. Parents have to take that responsibility on themselves. And you might start in the younger years allowing things, and as you get older and maybe more in the church and the life of the church, maybe you'll get to the point where you go, "These things, I'm uncomfortable with these things now." Right? My youngest kids did read the Greek myths. We had a book on this because it never occurred to me, "Oh, these are actually demons from, the history of Greece, and many martyrs were made, when they cast these same demons down in the temple." So, we have to allow people to be where they're at and to grow. Um, but the line for me has moved over time to more and more strict. Okay, so let's see, Matushka. Everyone misses Matushkas here, so it's great to have you in the chat. And great point about there being a difference with a family that's recently come to Orthodoxy with their kids and having been exposed to various things. Yeah, I feel like we have so many conversations where we don't make a distinction. And there is a distinction. If your kids have never been exposed to really dangerous or damaging things, then God bless you. And you can like never go to those things, and that's okay. But if you're coming out of that, if you just take all of that away from your child without discernment, it can cause a child to rebel. If all of a sudden you become Orthodox and now you can't read all of the fun books, right? This can be a temptation too. So I would, again, I would get rid of Percy Jackson, Harry Potter, anything like 50 Shades of Grey. It's the vampire one from a few years ago. But you might have to make those decisions really slowly. Maybe things need to, just happen to disappear at night. Each family needs its own personal discernment on these matters with the spiritual father's advice. Yeah, exactly, Matushka. Twilight, that's it. Thank you. Yeah, Twilight's the other one. Which, fun fact, my husband and I actually honeymooned in La Push, which is, I guess, in the book, which I didn't know, but it's where the Indians are. Someone told me this. They were very excited that I had been there. I've never read them either. So we're going to talk more and more about literature over the summer. I wouldn't get too stuck in these weeds. You want to have good, healthy books for your children. Just I'm always about cutting out the very worst and adding in the very best. And I think that's going to put you in the right direction. And over time, you can more clearly define some of that. Our friend also asked about what program I used for teaching of the faith. And I think in the beginning, I used Law of God. And I think there are 2 books by this author or with this name. And so maybe if Mela is still here, I don't know, maybe she knows which one I'm talking about, but it's a big, thick, it was a hardcover, and it went through the entire Old Testament and the New Testament, and then a short bit of history of the church, and then the theology. And so it was just very easy for us to read one little page a day. We kind of did different things at different times, but that was one of our standards. Okay, what's your opinion on John Senior's good books list? I don't know who that is, Marilyn. Who is that? So here's one of my big ideas. Matushka might laugh at me, but here's one of my big ideas that I can't do, but I hope one of you, somebody out there will do this, is what we really need is a website like Common Sense Media used to be, where we can have books posted and basically book reviews from Orthodox parents, so that people can know exactly what's in a book. I appreciate Common Sense Media, even though they've gone very leftist now. Originally, they were great, and what was good about it was that it told you exactly what was in the book. So under maybe sexuality or something, it would have, or romance and sex, it would have, kids call each other boyfriend, girlfriend. There's a kiss on the cheek, or in another book, it might be they have passionate kisses all the time. They, are doing other inappropriate things. What my point is, it's telling you exactly what is in the book. And I think that is best instead of just reading other people's general reviews, because if you know what is exactly in the book, then you can decide if that's the right book for your family or not. Yeah, we just need someone to build a website, and if we had maybe 10 different parents who would be willing to, review 5 books a year or something, we could over time create a really wonderful database. But I don't have time for this, guys. So if any of you do, let me know. Um, and I, yeah, so if you have any other last questions, go ahead and submit them because that's all I have, I think, for you guys today. But I will say that Lila Rose just came out. Um, Lila Rose just came out with a new video. If you don't know her, she's the head of Live Action. It's a pro-life group. She is actually a childhood friend of some friends of mine who are Orthodox. They were all homeschooled together, so that's a really lovely connection. But she just had a few days ago a really great discussion on the books in the public library. And it was a wonderful talk, and I would recommend it. It made me a little bit sad because I had a librarian on last summer. We'd had the same exact discussion. I think ours was better. This is a shout out to Mindy. But I made a mistake in the video, made a couple of mistakes to the point where I couldn't post it. So I hope to go over that with Mindy at some point in the future. But the point is, the libraries have extremely inappropriate books, and they have them in the children's section. So we're not talking even about the teen section, but even in the little guy section. Very there are pictures. I'll put it that way. And so again, I talk about this in I think I have a talk called The Normalization of Evil in Children's Literature. You can go read that or go listen to that at the beginning. It talks about it. But this is a real problem for our kids. And so the great thing about Mindy was that she was describing some of the ways that they are hiding this in books now. So for instance, if you see the word spicy in a book, if you're old like me, you didn't know what that meant. That meant that there was some sexual stuff going on in a book. So there are some keywords that if you know to look for those keywords when you're searching for reviews, whether it's on Amazon or Common Sense Media, Goodreads, or others, if you kind of know the language that they're using for hiding these books in plain sight, then you can know. But I would be extremely careful with anything you take out of the library at this point because if you haven't been recently, you should go and look at the children's section, not the teens. The teens is even worse, but the children's section will have a lot of extremely inappropriate, actually pornographic material. Okay, and let's see what Marilyn says here. A famous classical teacher who wrote a large list of books he recommends for children. A lot of people in the classical education movement recommended that list. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that list, but like Andrew Pudewa and other people that I tend to follow in the classical world have put out lists. But again, some of the problems I have with that are the ideas of magic. Again, the Greek myths is a big one. It's something that I'll dive into in the next 2 months, so I'll leave it at that for now. But I think it's time for us to kind of come up with our own list with some caveats and recommendations. I'm going to close up here in a moment, but I will recommend the book Died in Murex. If you haven't read that yet, it's a really great book for a high schooler. I'm currently reading through a bunch of Orthodox novels for children to do a stream on this or do a video on this, but that's a really great one. It's probably been my favorite one so far. So yeah, I think that's all I have. I just want to say thanks again to all the people that have become members in the last bit, and to Stevie who was very generous with the super chat this morning. I always enjoy the questions and the comments I get, and so if you have any questions about anything we've talked about, please let me know, and I'll try to address them in the next video. So hope you all had a blessed ascension, and we'll see you later.